Hey geometry students, Mr. Zacek back and better than ever here in Unit 3, Lesson 2, and we're going to answer this question: what are the types of angles that are formed by parallel lines? A little bit off there. So another way of saying that is, given parallel lines, what conclusions can we make? All right, this is the question that we want to answer today. Conclusions can we make? And we talked last time in lesson 1 about different types of angles, and we're going to review that a little bit here today and look at these conclusions. Okay, so number 1 is if two lines are parallel, now I just added this in there and you should add this in there, and cut by a transversal, then corresponding angles are congruent. All right, let's review the properties of corresponding angles. All right, they are on the same side of the transversal, and one is an interior and one is an exterior angle. So I won't go do the highlighting on all of these, but let's, the way we did this is, okay, these are going to be our interior angles here. These are going to be our exterior angles. And you can kind of review this in the other one. I lost one. And the other part of it is understanding that one of the angles has to come from the top grouping and one of the angles has to come from the bottom grouping. So last time in lesson 1 we just listed what the corresponding angles are. Now we're going to make this conclusion that they are congruent. So we could say that angle 1 is congruent. So angle 1 is an exterior. I need an interior that's on the same side of the transversal. That would be angle 5. So angle 1 and angle 5. Angle 4 is going to be congruent to angle 8. Angle 2 is going to be congruent to angle 6. And angle 3 is going to be congruent to angle 7. So if we were given this in a proof context, this thing right here would be our reason. And again, that should look familiar from our proof terminology lesson back in Unit 2. All right, but it'll start to make more sense now. All right, moving along. If two lines are parallel and cut by a transversal, then alternate interior angles are congruent. Let's review what alternate interior angles are. Alternate part means that they are on opposite sides of the transversal. Interior means that they both have to be interior angles. And what are they? They're congruent. So let's look at that. The interior is going to be between the two parallel lines. T is the transversal in this case. Remember, one has to come from the top grouping, one from the bottom grouping. So angle 4 would have to be congruent to angle 6, and angle 5 would be congruent to angle 3. All right. Now, moving along, if two lines are parallel and cut by a transversal, then alternate exterior angles are congruent. So again, let's review what this means. Okay, opposite sides of the transversal. Okay, and here they are both exterior. So the exterior happens outside of the parallel lines. And right now it's pretty obvious. It can get a little bit more confusing when we start adding extra lines in, which we'll see as things progress. So what's their relationship? They're congruent. So that would be angle 1 would be congruent to angle 7. And again, if we're going to mark that on here, we'd mark it like this. And then angle 2 would be congruent to angle 8. So 2 and 2. Okay. So here we go, moving along. If two lines are parallel, then same side interior angles are supplementary. Now, this is same side, that's the first property. Interior, that's the second property. Supplementary, remember with supplementary, this is our 180. So they both are going to add up to 180 degrees. So let's highlight where the interior is. A number of years ago, I was teaching this one day, and I was just, trying to get people excited. And as I was coming into class, I don't remember exactly who the student was, but I got fired up and I go, when they're on the same side and they're on the inside, they're supplementary. And I just did that for like a whole class period. And then the rest of the year, whenever that we would talk about this, I had whatever that student was, I would just point to her and I would say, when they're on the same side and when they're on the inside, and she would go, supplementary. Anyway, so let's move on here with this. So what can we conclude here? The measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 5 equals 180. And the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180. Again, keep in mind, one of the angles always has to come from the top grouping. One of the angles has to come from the bottom grouping. All right? So those are the types of angles that we have in specific angle pairs. Now we're going to do some problems to solve them. Okay, so it says if L is parallel to M and the measure of angle 1 equals 110 degrees, find the remainder of the angle measures. Okay, so there's several ways to do this, but here's what I want you to think about. When you have two parallel lines and one transversal, okay, that means that you're only going to have two different angle measures. So there's a lot of ways we can think about this. So here's what I would suggest. Here's a way to think about it. Angle 1 and angle 3, those are vertical angles, so they have to be congruent. So that's going to be 110. 3 and 5 are alternate interior, and we just said that when the lines are parallel, those are congruent. And then 5 and 7 are going to be vertical angles, so that will be 110. So that's our first angle measure. Now, if we come back up here, 1 and 2, this is a, what is this called right here? This is a linear pair. And we should remember that a linear pair is also supplementary. So the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 has to equal 180. So we know that 1 is 110 plus the measure of angle 2. So therefore the measure of angle 2 equals 70 degrees. So 2 is going to be 70. So that means what's 4? You guessed it, 70, because those are vertical angles. 6 would be 70, and 8 would be 70. Okay, so those are the two angles. So when you are, you get a question like this where you need to find angle measures, start by finding the 4 congruent angles. In this case, it was 1, 3, 5, and 7. So like we know that 1 is congruent to angle 3 is congruent to angle 5 is congruent to angle 7, okay? And then the other one is that angle 2 is congruent to angle 4, is congruent to angle 6, is congruent to angle 8. And you can think of that, again, a whole number of ways, but recognize linear pairs, recognize vertical angles, and then we start to get into adding in our corresponding and those different types of things as well. Okay, so for problems 2 through 5, let's solve for x given that L is parallel to M, and we're going to kind of review some things as well with our terminology. Okay, so we're given parallel. This line right here is our transversal. So given parallel lines cut by a transversal, this pair of angles is, here's what we want to, the way we want to see it. We want to recognize that corresponding angles are congruent. So one of the ways that I like to do this is I like to pick one angle, the vertical angle is congruent, the alternate interior angle is congruent, and this one is congruent. So we got those 4 markings. Now all 4 of those are going to be the same, meaning all 4 of the other ones are going to be the same, which means that the angles left that we have, if you want to put 2 markings in, we could do it that way, are going to be equal to each other. So that's the only relationship that we have. They're either equal or they're supplementary. Okay, so these 2 are corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are congruent to each other, so we can set these equal. Okay, let's add 20, subtract 3x. We get 2x equals 30, divide by 2. Okay, x equals 15. All right. So what do we have going on here? All right. Well, we've got, let's kind of take that approach again. This one is, those are vertical, alternate interior here. Okay. Now notice that the 2x minus 40, let me use my highlighter here. Notice this one has a marking, but the other angle, whoops, stray highlighter, the other angle doesn't have a marking. So that means those 2 angles are going to add up to 180. That's the only thing. They're either equal to each other or they add up to 180. So 4x plus 20 plus 2x plus 40 equals 180. So this would be 6x plus 60 equals 180. Combine like terms, subtract 60, 6x equals 120, divide by 6, and we get x equals 20. Okay? So let's do the last couple here. So again, here we go. Pick one of them. Vertical angles, alternate interior. What are we left with? Well, we're left with 2 angles that don't have markings. That means they're going to be equal to each other, and it would be helpful for us to recognize as well that these are alternate interior angles. And like they said in the, if the lines are parallel and cut by a transversal, then these angles are congruent. One thing to mention notationally is one of the ways that we show parallel is by using arrows. So if you see arrows on the line, like in your textbook, you'll see them, they'll be filled in. I don't fill them in normally when I write them, but in your textbook you'll see them filled in. That's a notation that indicates parallel. Okay, that's a little aside. So alternate interior angles, if they're congruent when they're parallel, so x plus 20 equals 4x minus 10. Okay, so let's subtract x, let's add 10. 30 equals 3x, let's divide by 3 and get 10. Okay. All right, what do we got going on here in number 5? Well, one arc, those are the vertical, alternate interior, and vertical. So we should notice, hey, this one has an arc, this one doesn't. That means they are going to add up to 180. We also want to see that this pair is called same side interior angles. And when they're on the same side, and when they're on the inside, they're supplementary. It's not the same in the video. All right, so again, supplementary means they add up to 180. So we combine like terms. 10x plus 10 equals 180. Subtract 10, 170. Divide by 10, 17. Okay? All right, and then our last one for this one, we got these angles, mark, mark, alternate interior, mark, mark. So these are, again, alternate interior angles. And when the lines are parallel, those two angles are going to equal each other. So 8x plus 16 equals 2x plus 70. All right, and so we're going to subtract, and we'll get 6x equals, what's that, 60, 54, divide by 6, I think that's 9. So there we have it. Now, so for the first lesson here, this part 1 is going to be just kind of the algebra type stuff of it, but where we're going next is we're going to do proving things with it. So we're going to have to know these reasons that we've been talking about, and we have to be able to recognize you know, the different types of angle pairs. So you want to think about the names, even though in this lesson right now, it's not probably critically important for you to do the assignment to know all the names. You can kind of use this technique of the markings. Are they the same markings? If they are, they're equal. If not, they add up to 180. All right, good luck. Thanks for tuning in.